The story of Marvel began long before superheroes ruled the movie theaters, long before billion-dollar films, long before Iron Man, Spider-Man, or the Avengers became household names. It began with one businessman. In 1939, publisher Martin Goodman founded a small company called Timely Publications in New York City. There were no luxurious offices, no famous artists, no blockbuster characters, no investors willing to pour millions into comic books. The company started with only a small amount of capital and a simple goal: to publish magazines and comic books that people would enjoy reading. At the time, America was still recovering from the Great Depression. Millions of families struggled to survive. Money was scarce. Businesses failed every day. Starting a publishing company during such uncertain times seemed incredibly risky. Many people believed comic books were nothing more than a temporary trend. Few imagined they would become a global industry worth billions of dollars. Martin Goodman ignored the doubts. He rented a modest office. I had only a handful of employees. Every dollar mattered. Every printing decision carried financial risks. If one issue failed to sell, the company could lose money couldn't afford to replace. There were no guarantees, only hope. Instead of creating every comic himself, Goodman worked with freelance writers and artists. The small team spent long hours developing stories that could capture readers' imagination. Deadlines were constant. Budgets were tight. Everyone understood that the company's future depended on selling enough copies every month. Then came the company's first major publication in October 1939, Marvel Comics No. One appeared on newsstands. Nobody expected what happened next. The issue introduced two new heroes, the Human Torch and Namor the Submariner. Readers loved them. The comic became an instant success. Its initial print run of approximately 80 copies sold out almost immediately. Demand became so strong that additional copies were printed. Altogether, nearly 900 copies were eventually sold, an extraordinary achievement for a brand new publisher. For Martin Goodman, it was proof that the business could survive. Money finally began flowing into the company. The tiny publisher suddenly had momentum. Every successful issue allowed the company to hire more artists, more writers, more editors. The office slowly expanded, but success brought new challenges. Competition grew rapidly. Dozens of publishers wanted to copy Timely's success. Every month, new comic books appeared on newsstands. Every company fought for the attention of young readers. Goodman knew that standing still meant falling behind. He constantly searched for new ideas, new characters, new stories, new talent. His willingness to take risks became one of the company's greatest strengths. Then the world changed. In 1939, World War I began. As America prepared for war, millions of people searched for heroes they could believe in. Comic books became more than entertainment. They became symbols of courage, hope, and justice. Sales continued growing. Timely Publications expanded faster than anyone expected. What had started as a tiny publishing company with a few employees was becoming a serious business. Martin Goodman couldn't possibly know what the future would bring. He couldn't imagine that one day his small company would create some of the most famous fictional characters in history. He couldn't imagine movies earning billions of dollars, or millions of fans wearing Marvel shirts around the world. At that moment, it was simply a small publisher trying to survive one issue at a time. But sometimes the biggest empires begin in the smallest offices. And the first page of Marvel's story had only just been written. The success of Marvel Comics No. One surprised everyone. No one expected a brand new comic book from a small publisher to become one of the best-selling releases of the year. For Martin Goodman, it was a clear message. Readers wanted superheroes, and they wanted more. The company immediately began producing new issues. Printing presses worked around the clock. Artists rushed to meet impossible deadlines. Writers searched for bigger adventures. Every successful comic brought more readers, more revenue, and great ambition. The biggest stars of the early years were two unforgettable heroes, the mysterious Human Torch and the powerful Namor the Submariner. The Human Torch wasn't an ordinary superhero. He was an artificial man capable of bursting into flames and flying through the sky. His blazing appearance fascinated readers across America. Namor was completely different, the Prince of Atlantis, half human, half Atlantean. He was powerful, proud, unpredictable. Sometimes he fought villains, sometimes he fought humanity itself. And like many heroes of the time, Namor wasn't perfect. His personality made him feel real. Readers loved that. The rivalry between Human Torch and Namor became one of the biggest attractions in comic books. Their battles filled entire issues. Each fight became bigger than the last. Children eagerly waited for every new release. Sales continued climbing. The small publishing company was becoming a serious business. Then history changed everything. In 1939, World War E began. By 1941, the United States officially entered the war. Millions of young Americans joined the military. Families searched for hope during uncertain times. Comic books became more than entertainment, they became symbols of courage. Readers wanted heroes who stood against evil, heroes who represented justice, heroes who gave people confidence that good could still win. Martin Goodman understood exactly what readers needed. His writers and artists began creating stories inspired by the changing world. Sales exploded. Millions of comic books were printed every year. Children bought them, teenagers collected them, soldiers even carried comic books overseas to read during breaks from the battlefield. For many young Americans, these colorful stories offered a brief escape from the fear of war. The company expanded rapidly. More artists joined the staff. More writers arrived with fresh ideas. Editors worked day and night. The once tiny office became increasingly crowded. Deadlines became tighter. Demand became higher. Success created opportunity. But Martin Goodman wasn't satisfied. He believed the company still needed something even bigger. A hero unlike anything readers had ever seen. Someone who would become the face of American courage. That hero arrived in 1941. A young man carrying a shield, dressed in red, white, and blue, fighting against tyranny before America had even officially entered the war. His name was Captain America. The very first issue of Captain America comics became an instant sensation. Its cover showed Captain America punching Adolf Hitler in the face. The image shocked readers. It also made headlines across the country. The first issue reportedly sold nearly 1 million copies, making it one of the biggest comic book successes of its era. Suddenly, Timely Publications was no longer just another small publisher. It had become one of America's fastest-growing comic book companies. Revenue increased dramatically. Printing volumes reached millions of copies. Newsstands across the country displayed Timely as heroes. The company had transformed from a risky startup into one of the leading names in comic books. Yet no one inside the office could imagine what lay ahead. The greatest heroes in Marvel history, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, the X-Men, were still decades away from being created. But the foundation had been built. One small publisher, a handful of talented artists, a few unforgettable heroes, and a dream that was beginning to grow into something far bigger than anyone had imagined. Marvel's golden age had only just begun. Success never lasts forever. By the end of World War E, America was changing. Millions of soldiers returned home. Families began rebuilding their lives. The excitement surrounding wartime superheroes slowly disappeared. Readers wanted something different. Comic books that once sold hundreds of thousands of copies suddenly began losing their audience. The heroes who had inspired an entire generation during the war were no longer enough. Sales started falling month after month. Newsstands ordered fewer copies. Unsold comic books were returned to publishers. Every returned issue meant lost money. For Timely Publications, the situation became dangerous. Only a few years earlier, the company had been growing rapidly. Now, revenue was shrinking, printing costs remained high, employee salaries still had to be paid, artists and writers still expected work, but readers were disappearing. The comic book industry entered one of its first major crises. Many publishers closed forever, some declared bankruptcy, others simply disappeared without warning. Martin Goodman realized something important. If the company continued relying only on superheroes, it might not survive. He made a difficult business decision. Instead of focusing on one genre, Timely Publications began experimenting with everything readers seemed interested in. romance comics, western stories, detective mysteries, crime comics, jungle adventures, horror, science fiction, war stories, humor, even teenage romance became surprisingly popular. The company was no longer asking, "What do we want to publish?" Instead, it asked, "What are people willing to buy?" It was a fight for survival. Every new comic became an experiment. Some succeeded, many failed. Editors carefully watched sales numbers every month. If one title sold poorly, it was cancelled. Immediately, the pressure inside the company became enormous. Artists worried about losing their jobs. Writers searched desperately for fresh ideas. Editors worked long hours trying to predict the next trend. Nobody knew what readers would want next. Even the company as famous superheroes almost disappeared. Characters who had once sold nearly 1 million copies became increasingly rare. Many titles were cancelled completely. It seemed as though the age of superheroes had come to an end. Financially, the company entered uncertain territory. Profits became unpredictable. Some years were successful. Others were disappointing. There was no stability, only constant adaptation. Martin Goodman refused to surrender. He believed surviving difficult times was more important than chasing short-term success. His philosophy was simple: if readers changed, the company would change too. This decision saved timely publications. While many competitors vanished forever, Goodman's company remained alive. It wasn't dominating the industry anymore, but it was still standing. Sometimes survival is the greatest victory. Years passed, the company continued publishing whatever genres kept the business operating. From the outside, few people believed this struggling publisher had much of a future. Many assumed its best years were already over. Some believed superheroes would never become popular again. They were wrong, because inside the company, a young editor named Stan Lee was growing increasingly frustrated. He wanted to create something completely different. Heroes who felt human, heroes who made mistakes, heroes who argued, heroes who struggled with everyday life. At first, almost nobody believed his ideas would work. But those ideas were about to change not only the future of the company, they would change the entire comic book industry forever. By the late 1950s, the company was still alive, but just barely. The golden age of superheroes had faded. Most of the comic books that once made readers dream had disappeared from store shelves. The company, now known as Atlas Comics, spent years publishing westerns, romance stories, horror, science fiction, detective adventures, monster comics, and humor. Some titles sold reasonably well, many failed. Nothing became a true phenomenon. The excitement that had once surrounded comic books was gone. Inside the office, morale was low, budgets were tight, the staff was small. At one point, only a handful of people worked in the editorial department. One of them was a young editor named Stan Lee. Stan had joined the company as a teenager. He had dreamed of becoming a great writer. Instead, years passed writing stories he no longer enjoyed. Month after month, year after year, he followed the same formulas, the same predictable characters, the same simple endings. Eventually, he became exhausted. He later admitted that he had seriously considered leaving comics forever. He believed his career had reached a dead end. He wanted to write novels, movies, anything except comic books. After nearly 20 years in the industry, Stan felt burned out. Then something unexpected happened. Marvel's biggest competitor, DC Comics, released a new superhero team called the Justice League of America. The comic became a major success. Readers were suddenly interested in superheroes again. Martin Goodman noticed the sales immediately. He called Stan Lee into his office. His request was simple: "We need our own superhero team." Stan wasn't excited. He had written countless stories over the years. He didn't want to create another group of perfect heroes wearing colorful costumes. He was ready to quit. That evening, he spoke with his wife, Joan Lee. She gave him advice that would change entertainment history. "If you were thinking about quitting anyway," she told him, "why not write the comic you've always wanted to write?" Those words stayed with him. For the first time in years, Stan decided to ignore the traditional rules of superhero comics. Instead of creating perfect heroes, he imagined people with fears, arguments, weaknesses. Personal problems, characters who worried about paying bills, who made mistakes, who disagreed with each other, who sometimes failed. It was a revolutionary idea. At the time, superheroes were usually flawless. They always knew the right answer. They rarely struggled with everyday life. Stan wanted the opposite. He wanted heroes who felt human. To bring those ideas to life, he partnered with one of the greatest artists in comic book history, Jack Kirby. Kirby possessed an incredible imagination. His action scenes were unlike anything readers had ever seen. Together, the two men began creating something completely different. They didn't realize it at the time, but they were about to reinvent the superhero forever. Many people inside the industry believed the project would fail. Editors thought readers wanted simple stories. Publishers believed flawed heroes would never sell. Some thought Stan had become too experimental, but he continued anyway, because this wasn't just another comic book anymore. It was his final chance. If it failed, he planned to leave the comic book industry forever. Everything depended on one publication, one team, one bold gamble. In 1961, that gamble finally reached comic book stores. Its title was simple: The Fantastic Four. No one could have predicted what would happen next. That single comic would not only save the company, it would become the beginning of the modern Marvel Universe, and one of the greatest business turnarounds in entertainment history. The success of the Fantastic Four changed everything. For the first time in years, Marvel Comics had a hit that felt different. Readers didn't just enjoy it, they connected with it. The characters argued like real people. They struggled like real people, they failed like real people. And then they tried again. This new approach was completely different from anything the comic industry had seen before. Behind this revolution was the creative partnership between Stan Lee and legendary artist Jack Kirby. Kirby brought massive imagination to every page, explosive action scenes, cosmic worlds, godlike battles. Lee brought personality, humor, and human emotion. Together, they created something powerful, something new, and something that would change entertainment forever. After Fantastic Four became a success, Marvel accelerated its creative output. The company began producing new characters at an incredible speed. Each new hero added something unique to the growing universe. Then came the next wave of legends: Spider-Man, a teenage boy struggling with responsibility, guilt, and everyday problems. Created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, Spider-Man became one of the most relatable superheroes ever written. Readers saw themselves in him, a hero who made mistakes, a hero who lost loved ones, a hero who had to grow up to first. Then came the Incredible Hulk, a story of science gone wrong. A man transformed into a monster whenever he became angry. It reflected inner conflict and emotional struggle in a way comics had never explored before. Then Iron Man, a billionaire inventor forced to confront the consequences of his own weapons. A hero built around technology, ego, and redemption. Then Thor, a mythological god brought into the modern world, combining ancient mythology with modern storytelling. Then X-Men, a team of mutants born different from society. Their stories explored discrimination, fear, identity, and acceptance. Each character represented deeper ideas than simple heroism. Each story carried emotional weight. Each issue expanded the Marvel Universe further. And readers noticed. Sales began to rise dramatically. Comic book stores reported increasing demand every month. Letters from fans poured into Marvel's offices. Children, teenagers, and even adults were reading the comics. What once had been a struggling company trying to survive was now becoming a cultural force. By the mid-1960s, Marvel Comics was selling millions of comic books per year. Characters like Spider-Man quickly became flagship titles, often outperforming competitors in sales. Marvel was no longer just reacting to the industry, it was leading it. The company's style became instantly recognizable. Human heroes, real emotions, flawed personalities, relatable struggles, and dynamic storytelling. DC Comics still remained a powerful competitor, but Marvel had created something new. A shared universe. Characters existed in the same world. They could meet. They could fight. They could team up. This concept changed comic books forever. Every new character added another piece to a growing interconnected universe. and readers couldn't get enough. Behind the scenes, Marvel was expanding rapidly. More writers joined the team, more artists were hired, more titles were launched. The production schedule became intense, but the momentum was unstoppable. What had started with a small gamble had turned into a full-scale revolution. Marvel was no longer just publishing comics, it was building a universe that would one day expand far beyond comic books and reshape global entertainment forever. As Marvel continued to grow, one competitor remained dominant in the industry: DC Comics. For decades, DC had been the undisputed leader in superhero publishing. They had iconic characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. They had stronger market presence, larger distribution networks, and a longer history in the industry. But Marvel was different. Marvel was new, fast, aggressive, and full of innovation. By the mid-1960s, a silent war had begun between the two companies. It wasn't a war fought with weapons, it was a war fought with stories, sales numbers, creativity, and reader attention. Every month, both companies released new comic issues. Every release was a competition: which hero sold more copies, which story attracted more readers, which company dominated the shelves. DC focused on perfect heroes, godlike characters, idealized symbols of justice. Marvel focused on something else entirely: human heroes, flawed personalities, emotional storytelling, relatable struggles. This difference became Marvel's greatest advantage. Teenagers and young adults began connecting more with Marvel characters. They saw themselves in Spider-Man. They understood Peter Parker as financial struggles, his responsibilities, his mistakes, his everyday problems. Meanwhile, DC characters remained larger than life in many ways. The battle between Marvel and DC was not just about comics. It was a battle of storytelling philosophies. Marvel's approach felt modern, real, emotional, and unpredictable. As demand grew, Marvel's sales began to rise rapidly. By the late 1960s, Marvel was producing dozens of comic titles every year. Each month brought new characters, new stories, new fan excitement. The company expanded its publishing schedule aggressively. More artists were hired, more writers joined the team, deadlines became tighter, but creativity exploded. Marvel began building what would later be called a shared universe. Characters from different comic series existed in the same world. Spider-Man could appear alongside the Fantastic Four. The Hulk could battle other heroes. Iron Man could join larger teams. This interconnected storytelling made Marvel feel alive. Everything was connected. Every event mattered. Every character influenced another. Readers became deeply invested. Sales numbers reflected this success. Marvel's circulation reached millions of comic books per month. Certain titles began outperforming competitors regularly. Spider-Man quickly became one of the best-selling characters in the industry. Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and X-Men also gained massive popularity. DC still remained powerful, but Marvel was closing the gap. First, behind the scenes, the company was growing into a serious business force. The success of its characters meant more licensing opportunities. Merchandise began appearing: toys, posters, clothing. The Marvel brand started expanding beyond comic books. What had once been a small, struggling publisher was now becoming a major entertainment company. But with growth came pressure. The faster Marvel expanded, the more it had to maintain quality. The more characters it introduced, the harder it became to manage consistency. The war with DC was far from over, but one thing was clear: Marvel was no longer the underdog trying to survive. It was a rising empire, and the battle for dominance in the comic book world had only just begun. By the 1980s, Marvel had transformed from a struggling comic book publisher into a serious entertainment business. The company was no longer just surviving issue by issue. It was now generating millions of dollars in revenue every year. The growth of characters like Spider-Man, the X-Men, Iron Man, and the Fantastic Four had turned Marvel into a dominant force in the comic book industry. As demand increased, so did the business opportunities. Merchandising deals expanded. Licensing agreements grew. New comic lines were launched constantly. Marvel was no longer just selling comic books. It was selling intellectual property. Characters became assets, stories became franchises, and franchises became long-term revenue streams. During this period, Marvel experienced one of the most important changes in its corporate history. It became a public company. This meant that Marvel was now listed on the stock market. Shares of the company could be bought and sold by investors. This transition brought massive amounts of new capital into the business. At first, it looked like a major success. The company's valuation increased rapidly. New investors entered the market. Stock prices began to rise as Marvel as characters became more valuable than ever. To outsiders, Marvel looked like a growing empire, a brand with unstoppable momentum, a company sitting at the center of a booming entertainment industry. But going public also changed everything inside the company. Now Marvel was no longer controlled by a small creative team alone. It was influenced by shareholders, investors, financial expectations, quarterly earnings reports. Every decision now had financial pressure attached to it. The focus slowly began to shift from storytelling to profit, from creativity to financial growth. In the short term, the strategy seemed successful. Marvel continued expanding aggressively. More comic titles were produced, more characters were introduced, more licensing deals were signed. Revenue reached tens of millions of dollars per year and continued to climb. But behind the scenes, the company's structure was becoming more complex. Different investors had different goals. Some wanted long-term growth, others wanted quick profits. This created internal pressure within the business. At the same time, the comic book industry itself was changing. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, speculation in comic books exploded. Collectors began buying comics not just to read them but to invest in them. People believed rare issues would become extremely valuable in the future. This caused a temporary boom in sales. Marvel benefited heavily from this trend. Sales numbers surged. New titles were launched at record speed. Limited editions, variant covers, and collectible issues flooded the market. For a moment, it looked like Marvel had entered a golden financial age. But underneath the surface, instability was growing. The market was becoming artificially inflated. Demand was driven by speculation, not long-term readership. And Marvel, like many companies in the industry, expanded aggressively to match the boom. Production increased, costs rose, expectations became unrealistic. The company was growing fast but not always sustainably. Still, at its peak during this period, Marvel was considered one of the most powerful names in comics. A publicly traded entertainment company worth hundreds of millions of dollars in market value. A brand that controlled some of the most recognizable characters in the world. A business that had evolved far beyond its humble beginnings in a small New York office. But financial history often moves in cycles, and what goes up quickly can also fall just as fast. The challenges that would soon arrive were bigger than anything Marvel had faced before. The next chapter would push the company to the edge of collapse and force it into one of the most dramatic survival stories in entertainment history. As the 1990s began, Marvel entered what seemed like the greatest period in its history. Comic books were no longer seen as simple entertainment for children. They had become collectibles, investments. People no longer bought one copy to read. Many bought 5, 10, sometimes even 20 copies of the same issue. Why? Because collectors believed today's comics would become tomorrow as priceless treasures. Stores encouraged the excitement. Publishers fueled the demand. Investors entered the market. Speculators rushed in. Everyone believed comic books were the next big financial opportunity. The comic book industry exploded. Comic shops opened across America. Thousands of new collectors appeared almost overnight. Long lines formed outside stores whenever a major issue was released. Some buyers camped overnight just to secure first editions. Marvel watched demand skyrocket. The company responded as quickly as possible. New series launched almost every month. Special editions, limited editions, collector-ass editions, gold foil covers, silver covers, embossed covers, hologram covers, glow-in-the-dark covers, variant covers, polybagged comics that readers were afraid to open because they believed unopened copies would become more valuable. Everything was marketed as rare. Everything was advertised as limited. Everything promised future profits. Collectors couldn't buy them fast enough. Some issues sold millions of copies. One of the biggest examples came in 1991 when X-Men 1 sold more than 8 million copies, making it one of the best-selling comic books in history. Marvel's printing presses worked around the clock, warehouses filled with comic books. Distributors struggled to keep up. Retailers kept placing larger orders. Every new release seemed guaranteed to succeed. Financially, Marvel was thriving. Annual revenue climbed into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Profits continued rising. The company, as stock attracted more investors, executives believed the boom would continue for years. Wall Street loved the numbers. Investors poured money to comic book companies. Marvel's market value climbed higher and higher. Inside the company, optimism was everywhere. Hiring increased, production expanded, marketing budgets grew larger. Everything pointed upward. From the outside, Marvel looked unstoppable. Its superheroes dominated comic book stores. Spider-Man remained one of the most recognizable fictional characters in the world. The X-Men became a cultural phenomenon. The Avengers continued expanding. New characters appeared constantly. The future seemed limitless, but beneath the excitement, a dangerous problem was growing. Most people buying comics weren't actually reading them. They were storing them in plastic bags, keeping them sealed, waiting for prices to increase. The market was no longer driven by loyal readers. It was driven by speculation. Millions believed comic books would make them rich. Publishers printed more copies to satisfy demand, then even more, and more. Soon, limited editions weren't truly limited anymore. Rare comics stopped being rare. Supply exploded, far beyond real demand. Very few people noticed. The numbers still looked incredible. Sales reports remained strong. Stock prices continued climbing. Marvel executives celebrated record-breaking profits. Investors expected endless growth. But economic bubbles always follow the same pattern. First comes excitement, then greed, then overconfidence, and finally reality. Within just a few years, the comic book bubble would burst. Comic shops would close, sales would collapse, Marvel's soaring profits would disappear, and the company that looked invincible would soon face one of the greatest financial disasters in entertainment history. The bubble had finally burst. Almost overnight, everything changed. The collectors disappeared. Comic book stores stopped placing huge orders. Retailers who had once purchased thousands of copies suddenly couldn't even sell hundreds. Boxes of unsold comics filled warehouses. Shelves that had once emptied within hours now remained full for months. The excitement that had fueled the industry simply vanished. Marvel watched its sales collapse. Month after month, revenue continued falling. Titles that once sold over 1 million copies now struggled to sell a fraction of that. Comic shops across America began closing their doors. Hundreds disappeared. Then thousands. Distributors filed for bankruptcy. Retailers cancelled orders. The entire comic book industry entered one of the worst crashes in its history. For Marvel, the consequences were devastating. Only a few years earlier, executives believed growth would continue forever. The company had expanded rapidly. It hired more employees, produced more comics, signed larger licensing deals, borrowed more money. Everything had been built around one assumption: sales would never stop growing. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong. As revenue collapsed, expenses remained. Employees still needed salaries. Printing contracts still had to be paid. Loans still required repayment. Interest kept growing. The company's financial position became increasingly unstable. Debt continued piling up. Soon, Marvel owed more than $200 million, then more than $250 million. Banks demanded payments. Creditors became nervous. Investors panicked. Wall Street quickly lost confidence. Marvel's stock price plunged. Millions of dollars in market value disappeared. Shareholders watched their investments collapse. Inside the company, fear spread everywhere. Massive layoffs began. Editors lost their jobs. Artists were dismissed. Writers were let go. Entire departments were reduced or eliminated. People who had spent years building Marvel suddenly found themselves unemployed. The atmosphere inside the offices completely changed. Only a short time earlier, employees celebrated record-breaking sales. Now they wondered whether the company would survive another month. The crisis became even worse because Marvel wasn't just fighting financial problems. It was also fighting itself. Powerful investors began battling for control of the company. Lawsuits were filed. Boardroom meetings turned into bitter arguments. Executives blamed one another. Shareholders demanded answers. Business partners accused each other of destroying Marvel. The legal battles became almost as dangerous as the financial crisis itself. Instead of focusing on creating great stories, the company spent enormous amounts of time fighting over money. Every decision became controversial. Every financial report brought more bad news. Confidence disappeared. By 1996, the situation had become unbearable. Marvel could no longer meet all of its financial obligations. The company that had once seemed unstoppable, the company that created Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Iron Man, the Hulk, Thor, and countless legendary heroes, was now standing on the edge of collapse. Many analysts believed bankruptcy was inevitable. Newspapers questioned whether Marvel would survive. Some predicted the company would be broken apart and sold piece by piece. Others believed its famous characters would end up owned by different corporations forever. Employees feared losing everything. Fans feared seeing Marvel disappear forever. For the first time in its history, the future of Marvel itself had become uncertain. The company had survived wars, changing markets, falling superhero popularity, and decades of competition, but this crisis was different. This wasn't simply about selling fewer comic books. This was about survival. A debt of more than $250 million, a collapsing business, investors at war, thousands of jobs disappearing, and one of the world's most famous comic book companies only moments away from extinction. Few people believed Marvel could recover. Almost everyone thought the story was over. They couldn't have been more wrong. The year was 1996. Marvel had reached its breaking point. The company that had created Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, and dozens of the world's most beloved superheroes could no longer pay its bills. Years of declining comic book sales, massive debt, bad business decisions, and the collapse of the comic book market had pushed Marvel to the edge. There was nowhere left to run. On December 27, 1996, Marvel officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The announcement shocked the entertainment industry. Headlines spread across newspapers around the world. One of the most famous comic book companies in history was bankrupt. For millions of fans, it seemed impossible. How could the company behind so many legendary heroes be fighting for its own survival? Inside Marvel's headquarters, uncertainty filled every office. Employees didn't know if they would still have jobs the following week. Artists worried that their careers were over. Editors wondered if another issue would ever be published. Some departments were nearly empty after repeated rounds of layoffs. The atmosphere was completely different from only a few years earlier. The excitement, the optimism, the rapid growth had all disappeared. Now there was only fear. Bankruptcy didn't mean the company immediately closed its doors, but it meant the business had entered court protection while trying to avoid complete collapse. Every dollar was carefully monitored. Every expense questioned, every contract reviewed. Creditors demanded repayment, banks wanted answers, lawyers filled conference rooms, financial advisors searched desperately for a solution. Meanwhile, a brutal power struggle erupted behind the scenes. Billionaire investor Ronald Perelman, who controlled Marvel, fought to keep control of the company. At the same time, businessman Carl Icahn and other major creditors challenged his plans. Courtrooms replaced boardrooms, lawsuits multiplied. Millions of dollars were spent fighting legal battles instead of creating comic books. Marvel wasn't just battling bankruptcy, it was battling itself. Months passed, then more months. No one knew who would eventually own the company. No one knew whether Marvel would even exist a year later. Industry experts began making grim predictions. Some believed Marvel would be broken into smaller companies. Others expected its famous superheroes to be sold one by one. Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers. Each character could end up belonging to different corporations forever. Fans feared the Marvel Universe would never exist again as one connected world. The company's stock had collapsed. Its reputation had suffered. Its future looked darker than ever before. many comic book stores stopped believing Marvel could recover. Some retailers reduced their orders dramatically, others stopped ordering altogether. Confidence had vanished. For the first time since Martin Goodman founded the company in 1939, Marvel's survival was no longer guaranteed. Nearly 57 years of history seemed ready to disappear. It looked like the final chapter. A legendary publisher, $250 million in debt, bankruptcy, courtroom battles, massive layoffs, a collapsing business, and almost nobody believed there was a way back. But hidden inside Marvel's offices, one idea still remained. The company might be running out of money, but it still owned something priceless: its characters: Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, the X-Men, the Hulk, heroes loved by millions around the world. Those heroes were about to become Marvel's last hope. The next decision would be the biggest gamble in the company's history. It would either save Marvel or destroy it forever. Bankruptcy had bought Marvel one thing: time. But time alone couldn't save the company. Marvel still needed money, a lot of money. The company's debts remained enormous. Bills continued arriving. Creditors demanded payment. Employees needed salaries. Without new cash, Marvel would disappear forever. Management faced an impossible decision. The company still owned something incredibly valuable: not buildings, not factories, not expensive equipment. Its greatest assets were its characters: Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Blade, the Hulk, Daredevil, the Punisher, Ghost Rider, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, characters loved by millions around the world. For decades, Marvel had protected them. Now it had no choice but to sell them. One by one, studio by studio. It was heartbreaking. Marvel wasn't selling comic books anymore. It was selling pieces of its own identity. The first major deals began to appear. The film rights to X-Men were licensed to 20th Century Fox. Soon afterward, Fantastic Four also went to Fox. Then came Marvel's most famous hero, Spider-Man. The movie rights were eventually acquired by Sony Pictures. Other heroes followed. Blade went to New Line Cinema. Daredevil moved to 20th Century Fox. The Punisher, Ghost Rider, and several others were licensed to different studios. Every agreement brought desperately needed cash. Millions of dollars entered Marvel's bank accounts. The money helped keep the lights on. Employees kept their jobs. The company survived another month, then another, and another. From a financial perspective, the strategy worked. Without these licensing agreements, Marvel might not have survived. But there was a painful cost. Marvel no longer controlled many of its greatest heroes. If another studio made a Spider-Man movie, Marvel had almost no creative control. If Fox decided what the X-Men looked like, Marvel couldn't stop them. If a film became a global success, most of the profits stayed with the movie studio, not Marvel. It was a strange situation. The company that created these legendary characters could no longer fully decide their future. Fans didn't always understand. Many believed Marvel owned everything connected to Spider-Man and the X-Men. In reality, the rights were scattered across Hollywood. Different studios owned different heroes. The Marvel universe had been divided like pieces of a giant puzzle. At the time, however, executives had little choice. The company wasn't thinking about building a cinematic universe. It wasn't dreaming about billion-dollar franchises. It was trying to survive until next year. Every licensing deal delayed bankruptcy. Every contract bought more time. Some movies became huge successes. In 1998, Blade surprised Hollywood by becoming a profitable hit. Then came X-Men in 2000. The film earned nearly $300 million worldwide. Only 2 years later, Spider-Man exploded at the global box office. It earned more than $800 million worldwide and became one of the biggest movies ever released. Audiences loved Marvel as heroes. Hollywood loved Marvel as heroes. Everyone was making money. Everyone except Marvel. The company watched from the sidelines as its own characters generated hundreds of millions of dollars for other studios. It was one of the greatest ironies in entertainment history. Marvel had created the heroes. Others were building billion-dollar film franchises with them. Inside the company, one question became impossible to ignore. What if we made the movies ourselves? It sounded crazy. Marvel was still recovering from bankruptcy. It didn't have billions of dollars. It didn't even own the film rights to many of its biggest characters anymore. But it still had something left, heroes that no studio wanted. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, the Avengers. Most Hollywood executives believed those characters were too risky, too unknown, too expensive. Marvel saw something different, not forgotten heroes, an opportunity, and soon. By the early 2000s, Marvel had survived bankruptcy, but surviving wasn't enough. The company had lost the movie rights to many of its biggest heroes. Spider-Man belonged to Sony Pictures, the X-Men and Fantastic Four belonged to 20th Century Fox. Other characters had been licensed to different studios. Marvel watched from the sidelines as Hollywood earned hundreds of millions of dollars from heroes it had created. Every successful movie reminded executives of the same painful truth. Marvel owned the characters but not the profits. The company needed a new strategy, one bold enough to change everything. Instead of licensing more heroes, Marvel decided to become a movie studio itself. Many people thought the idea was insane. Marvel had never produced major Hollywood films. It wasn't one of the giant studios. It didn't have billions of dollars. And if the plan failed, the company might disappear forever. Still, Marvel's leadership believed one thing. Nobody understood Marvel as heroes better than Marvel. In 2005, the company made the biggest gamble in its history. Marvel secured a financing deal worth approximately $525 million. The money would allow the company to produce its own movies, but there was a terrifying condition. The loan was backed by the film rights to several Marvel characters. If Marvel failed to repay the money, it could lose even more of its superheroes. The company's future was literally being placed on the line. Everything depended on making one successful movie. The executives searched for the perfect character. Spider-Man was unavailable, the X-Men were unavailable. Fantastic Four belonged to another studio, even Hulk had complicated rights. Finally, Marvel chose a hero that many Hollywood executives considered a risky choice. Iron Man. At the time, Iron Man wasn't one of Marvel's biggest mainstream stars. Many people outside comic books barely knew who he was. Several studios had already rejected the project. Some believed audiences would never watch a movie about a billionaire engineer wearing a metal suit. Marvel disagreed. Then came another controversial decision. The company cast Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. It shocked Hollywood. Downey was an incredibly talented actor, but he had struggled with addiction and legal problems for years. Many studios considered him uninsurable. Some investors worried he would damage the film. Marvel believed he was perfect. Director Jon Favreau fought hard to keep him in the role. The gamble became even bigger. Marvel wasn't just betting hundreds of millions of dollars on one movie. It was betting on one actor, one character, one dream. Filming began. Pressure filled every day of production. If Iron Man failed, Marvel would likely lose its financing, its reputation, and perhaps its future. Employees knew exactly what was at stake. This wasn't simply another superhero movie. It was the company's final chance. Then came May 2, 2008. Iron Man premiered in theaters. Nobody knew what would happen. The opening weekend exceeded expectations. Audiences loved Tony Stark. Critics praised the film. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance received worldwide acclaim. Word of mouth spread rapidly. Ticket sales continued climbing. The film earned more than $585 million worldwide against a production budget of about $140 million. It became one of the biggest hits of the year. Marvel had done the impossible. The company that had once stood on the edge of bankruptcy had successfully competed against Hollywood's biggest studios. But something even more important happened after the movie ended. Following the credits, a mysterious man named Nick Fury appeared. He spoke only a few sentences, but those seconds changed movie history forever. He mentioned something called the Avengers initiative. Most audiences had no idea what it meant. Marvel did. Iron Man wasn't just one successful film. It was the first chapter of a much larger plan. A connected universe, multiple heroes, multiple movies. After the success of Iron Man 2008, Marvel did something no studio had ever fully achieved before. It didn't just make movies, it built a universe, a connected timeline, a long-term plan stretching across multiple films, characters, and years. This became the Marvel Cinematic Universe MCU. At first, it looked like a risky experiment, one film at a time, one hero at a time. But Marvel's strategy was clear: every movie would connect to the next, every character would matter later, every story would build towards something bigger. In 2011, Marvel expanded the universe with major new heroes. Thor brought Norse mythology into the modern world, a god learning what it means to live among humans. In the same year, Captain America, the first Avenger, introduced the origin of one of Marvel's most iconic heroes, a soldier from the past, frozen in time, waking up in a modern world he no longer understood. Then came the Avengers initiative becoming reality. Marvel had been planning this moment for years. Separate heroes, separate films, now all coming together. In 2012, Marvel released the Avengers: Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Hulk, Black Widow, Hawkeye, all in one film. It became a global cultural event. Audiences had never seen anything like it before. The movie earned more than $1.5 billion worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Marvel's strategy was proven correct. Then the expansion accelerated. More films, more heroes, more stories. The MCU continued growing with massive releases such as Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers, Age of Ultron, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, co-produced with Sony, Black Panther, Thor, Ragnarok, Captain Marvel, Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers, Endgame. Each movie added another layer to the universe. New characters entered, old characters evolved, stories connected across years of storytelling. Marvel was no longer just producing movies, it was building the largest narrative universe in entertainment history. Then came the peak. Avengers: Infinity War 2018 introduced Thanos and the cosmic battle for the universe. It earned over $2 billion worldwide, but it was Avengers Endgame 2019 that became a historic milestone. The final battle of the original Avengers storyline, a decade of storytelling coming together in one film. The movie earned approximately $8 billion worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing films in history. Across all MCU films, the franchise would eventually generate more than $30 billion in global box office revenue, making it the most successful film franchise ever created. Marvel had achieved something unimaginable. The company that once faced bankruptcy, that sold its heroes just to survive, had now become the most powerful entertainment brand in the world. Its characters were no longer just comic book icons, they were global cultural symbols. The MCU changed Hollywood forever. Studios tried to copy the formula. Shared universes became the industry standard, but none matched Marvel's scale. None matched its consistency, and none matched its impact. What began with a risky $525 million gamble had grown into the most successful cinematic universe in history, and Marvel's story was still not finished. By 2009, Marvel had reached a turning point that would have been unimaginable during its darkest years. Only a decade earlier, the company was drowning in debt, fighting bankruptcy, and selling off its most valuable heroes just to survive. Now, Marvel was one of the most powerful entertainment brands in the world. Hollywood studios were making billions from its characters. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was beginning to take shape, and Marvel itself had become the center of global pop culture. That same year, a historic decision was made. The Walt Disney Company announced it would acquire Marvel Entertainment for approximately $4 billion. It was one of the biggest entertainment deals in history at the time. Disney didn't just buy a company, it bought a universe. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, the Avengers, and hundreds of other characters all became part of the largest media corporation on Earth. For Marvel, this moment represented something extraordinary. A company that had once been nearly destroyed by debt, that had sold its heroes to survive, that had fought through bankruptcy, was now worth billions of dollars. And owned by Disney, the acquisition gave Marvel something it had never fully had before: unlimited resources, global distribution power, and long-term stability. Under Disney, Marvel entered a new golden age. The Marvel Cinematic Universe expanded at an unprecedented scale. Films became global events. Characters became worldwide icons, box office records were broken again and again. But beyond the financial success, Marvel's legacy became something deeper. It proved that storytelling itself could become one of the most powerful business models in the world. From a small publishing company in 1939 to a bankrupt comic book brand in the 1990s to a global entertainment empire in the 21st century, Marvel's journey became a lesson in resilience, risk, and reinvention. It showed that even after near collapse, a company can rise again with the right ideas, the right timing, and the courage to take enormous risks. Marvel didn't just survive, it transformed the entire entertainment industry. Today, its characters are known in every corner of the world. Its films have generated tens of billions of dollars, and its stories continue to shape modern pop culture. The legacy of Marvel is not just about superheroes, it is about survival, reinvention, and the belief that even the most impossible comeback can become reality. By 2009, Marvel had reached a turning point that would have been unimaginable during its darkest years. Only a decade earlier, the company was drowning in debt, fighting bankruptcy, and selling off its most valuable heroes just to survive. Now, Marvel was one of the most powerful entertainment brands in the world. Hollywood studios were making billions from its characters. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was beginning to take shape, and Marvel itself had become the center of global pop culture. That same year, a historic decision was made. The Walt Disney Company announced it would acquire Marvel Entertainment for approximately $4 billion. It was one of the biggest entertainment deals in history at the time. Disney didn't just buy a company, it bought a universe. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, the Avengers, and hundreds of other characters all became part of the largest media corporation on Earth. For Marvel, this moment represented something extraordinary. A company that had once been nearly destroyed by debt, that had sold its heroes to survive, that had fought through bankruptcy, was now worth billions of dollars. And owned by Disney, the acquisition gave Marvel something it had never fully had before: unlimited resources, global distribution power, and long-term stability. Under Disney, Marvel entered a new golden age. The Marvel Cinematic Universe expanded at an unprecedented scale. Films became global events. Characters became worldwide icons. Box office records were broken again and again. But beyond the financial success, Marvel's legacy became something deeper. It proved that storytelling itself could become one of the most powerful business models in the world. From a small publishing company in 1939 to a bankrupt comic book brand in the 1990s to a global entertainment empire in the 21st century, Marvel's journey became a lesson in resilience, risk, and reinvention. It showed that even after near collapse, a company can rise again with the right ideas, the right timing, and the courage to take enormous risks. Marvel didn't just survive, it transformed the entire entertainment industry. Today, its characters are known in every corner of the world. Its films have generated tens of billions of dollars, and its stories continue to shape modern pop culture. The legacy of Marvel is not just about superheroes, it is about survival, reinvention, and the belief that even the most impossible comeback can become reality.